Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. France, pussy. Nazi Germany, Mother Russia, sunk the Titanic.
Soy Cat, and this is Europe as seen
Americans think Iceland is an iceberg.
by Americans. This, on the other hand, is America as seen by Europeans, and these 100%.
It's true. It's true. Old Mexico.
by Americans. This, on the other hand, is America as seen by Europeans, and these 100% very accurate maps tell us that clearly there is some education needed to tell Americans about Europe, also Russians about Europe, because I feel like they agree with this map, and also to explain to Europeans some of the big cultural differences in the United States of America. And so let's do it in everyone's favorite way, which is maps, because the first big difference is the size of an average European country versus the size of, say, the United States of America. Because if you take North America and you map it onto Europe by population, this is the map that you get. That's right. If you take the European countries that it takes to get the North American country of an equivalent population, it's pretty.
Jesus Christ. I'm pretty certain there are more people in California than there are in Canada. I think there's like 30-something million people in Canada. It's probably the most surprising thing
wild to
here.
look at, because Mexico is not just the size of a European country, it's the size of Portugal, Spain, Italy, as well as Slovenia and Croatia, plus San Marino and the Vatican City. All of their populations added together matches a Mexico. Same with Canada and every Nordic country, Ireland and the Baltics. All of those countries, if you add their population together, you get one unit that is the equivalent of Canada.
That's the most surprising.
Because in North America, they're much more centralized into, I guess, federalized nations. So centralized in to go right back outwards. You might not realize that, like, actually, yeah, the USA has a lot of people living there, more than the UK, France, or, you know, there's like 13 countries in Europe you can add together, 13 of the big ones too, and you still only just about match the United States of America. And yeah, the really shocking thing to hear is really just to make you realize how centralized the North American continent is within Canada, the US, and Mexico. Guatemala takes up.
Well, that's like the whole that's like the whole thing. I mean, you have, you know, Panama and some other Central American countries.
All of the Balkans, but otherwise, all of the Caribbean islands are roughly the same population as Ukraine. I actually found this to be quite shocking because, wait a minute, what? All of the Caribbean islands? Like, I was surprised that they had such a high population.
Same.
Because in my understanding, a lot of them were very, very lowly populated. In fact, I looked up Dominica's population, and 71,000 people live there. There are a lot of Caribbean nations, which might as well be micronations. Because again, Dominica has a smaller population than Andorra. More people live in that tiny little map.
I mean, Dominica is probably one of the small. You have probably the most come from Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and maybe Bahamas.
Because again, Dominica has a smaller population than Andorra. More people live in that tiny little mountainous, half Spanish, half French area than live in Dominica. And yeah, I just feel as though that's one of those crazy things we don't realize. What we also don't realize is that if you take Europe and map it the other way around, although Germany takes up a lot of states and the UK does, and France and Poland, if you look at the rest of it, it's like, man, Luxembourg is like the same population as Alaska. Have you seen Alaska recently? Do you want me to show you what's happening in Alaska? So this over here is Alaska. Do you see the size of this thing? It is bigger than, like, geographically than like any other US state or any European country.
I live in the smallest US state, Rhode Island, and we have more people than Alaska.
And
so,
yeah, the population of Luxembourg lives there. This thing, that population lives over there because, wow, isn't population density interesting?
And with Germany, I mean, there's a ton of people in California, a good amount in Arizona here. But I mean, there's like no people here.
So yeah, this is a very interesting map for that reason. I could talk about it a ton more because, like, look, Slovakia is just, is that Indiana? I genuinely don't know the US. I think that's Indiana. Belgium is Ohio. Switzerland is just Virginia. The European countries, when you overlay them on the United States, makes you realize that by person, by population, it's actually a very different story than you might think.
In the UK,
like, instead of saying, well, there's 50 countries in Europe and there's like 3 big ones in the United States, in North America, it gets much more interesting than that. Speaking of things that are interesting, here's what happens if you take US individual states and overlay them into Europe.
Yeah, check out how much people live in England. That's crazy. That's not even all of England.
England and Scotland and a bit of Northern Ireland have the same population as Florida. If you're in Wales, you have about the same number of people as Utah. It's nuts to look at. Anyway, with that said, states are interesting, but let's instead go into some real data. Let's compare the US and Europe directly. What is the unsupervised driving age in Europe?
It'll be 17 in New Jersey.
It is 18 everywhere besides the UK, Ireland, Iceland, Hungary, I want to say, and then also Georgia, not Armenia. You know what? Let's not start something. So Georgia, literally 4 or 5 different European countries have decided on 17. By the way, that's what I thought was the normal age. But in the United States, it goes from 16 to 16 and a half months in the majority of the country, down to 14 and 6 months.
I think it's 15 and 6 months is where you can get your driver's permit. I believe I'm talking for Rhode Island. And then at 16, you can get your license.
In South Dakota, I met a guy from South Dakota in Washington recently. I think he works at Microsoft, driving. And he said that we all learned to drive at like 14ish, something tractors. And I was like, what is your life? The difference in what that makes is pretty interesting because Americans value freedom, except when it comes to voting age, where the UK, actually, the United States, as well as most of Europe, all do agree that, 18 is when you can vote because you're real. Scotland and
we should make it higher.
There's a few other places where there's some elections that allow you to vote if you're under 18.
16 is crazy.
Same with Austria, allowing you to vote at 16, which is fascinating. Greece at 17. But in general, we all agree, Europeans and Americans, that the time that you get to decide things is when you're 18, unless it's when you're purchasing tobacco, in which case you better wait. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop doing my American accent.
Do it.
You better wait till you're 21
you better
if you
wait.
live in any of these 50 places. Whereas in Europe...
in my lifetime, it used to be 18 for tobacco. Interesting how they put it up to 21. You can get shot by a bullet in the face in the army at 18, but you can't buy cigarettes.
Everyone agrees that
you can buy guns, not cigarettes.
Once you're 18, you're an adult. We don't like you. And in some cantons, it's apparently 16. You're an adult. We might not like that you make those decisions, but they're your decisions to make.
I think you should make 21 for everything. Like driving, maybe not driving, tobacco, drinking, voting.
21. You will wait, damn it. Same with the minimum alcohol purchase age. It is 21 federally speaking. It's actually technically speaking set by the state, but the federal government withholds highway funding if you don't set your drinking age to 21, which can I just mention how crazy and ridiculous that is, that a country that claims to be, we're so federal and we get to make our own decisions as states, you don't get to make drinking age decisions, which is such a low level decision to make. Anyway, as you can see, as a result, the drinking age is much lower in Europe. And so really the thing about American freedom, it's interesting because you'd figure looking at these actually, besides driving a car, the things where you can harm yourself, alcohol and tobacco, you don't get to do in America till later, but if you can potentially harm other people, do it at 14, or if we're being more realistic, 15 or 16. I would say the actual thing that defines why this is so much lower in the United States than in Europe, partially it's necessity, you need to drive around America, but also partially it's that focus on economics, which is a much bigger driver and a much bigger unifier in the US than it is over here.
That's a good point, is because you can travel without a car much easier over here, whereas if you're over here, what do you do exactly if you don't have a car?
So all the talk of the stock market and economy should tell you that, but if you look at the Human Development Index, that gives you a real good clue as to the United States is a much more developed country as a result. I mean, you'd figure with all that not drinking, as we all know, economic development comes from drinking, smoking.
Us, the Rhode Island and Maine are the two shamefuls of New England. Dang it.
With all that not drinking, as we all know, economic development comes from drinking, smoking, and voting in national general elections, but not so much from driving, except actually, because of the economic factors that the United States spends a lot of time on. As a result, it's very, very blue up there. And bear in mind, HDI is a metric that doesn't focus so much on the economic side, so this is a metric that should heavily favor Europe, but even here you can see, only the northern bits of Europe are about the same as the US. Again, the fact that it stops at 0.925 when Norway is the highest in the world is a tiny bit misleading there, but it still looks like, in general, if you're plopped down in a random place in the United States, you have a better, more developed life than anywhere in Europe. Unless you're born in, What is that?
Mississippi.
Mississippi. In which case, sorry, try again next time. Speaking of things, by the way, what happened in this? Like, can someone explain to me what happened in the South of America?
Okay.
Give me like a long explanation, maybe stretch from like the American independence to now. Give me.
So, large slave-based economy prior to the Civil War, and very industrialized. And so I feel like getting rid of the slavery in the Civil War, and the fact that the North already had a jump start because they weren't relying on slavery for their economy, that I'm assuming that's a lagging in, or sort of a base reason for why it was just always more developed in this area. That'd be my guess.
A good racial explanation.
Probably.
And could you do that?
And
for
then
me
you
in
have
the
Jim Crow and prior to civil rights, and you have like half the. Anyways,
Thank you very much. With that said, the string of asking for sarcastic explanations on deep, complex topics that are only going to start wars continues. Speaking of starting wars, if we use a more favorable metric, the one most people care about,
Purchasing power,
what do
yeah.
you care about HDI? You probably don't. You care about how good your life is and how many things that you can buy to make your life better. And a big part of that is going to be income-based, right? Because the more income you have, the more nice things you can buy.
I'm surprised that I would think that PPP would fall off, would differ a lot from GDP, because the PPP is going to take into account the prices of your stuff within your country, whereas the GDP is just the wealth.
It's very hot in this room right now. I could buy air conditioning if I had money, but I live in the UK with an average salary of $22,603. That can't be. Oh, it's adjusted for PPP, which is this is crazy low, but that's after tax, I guess. So high tax and education. Wow, man, there's a lot happening.
Oh wait,
right here.
sorry, no, it's post-tax median disposable incomes. I was wrong. Sorry, I thought this is purchasing power parity.
This is once you adjust for healthcare and education for spending. In the US, the average salary is about $12,000 higher than in the UK, about $13,000 higher than Spain, and if you look at the rest of it, it's like, oh yeah, there's a big difference. The only
Okay, so is the amount of money you have left after all the taxes and it's like your expendable income, I guess?
countries in Europe which come close or again slightly beat the United States are Norway and Switzerland. The United States in general is a richer country, and the very top of the United
Lower
States
taxes.
is even richer than that. It's crazy to anyone who's been a European who's worked at a multinational can confirm. When you speak to an American at the same company, you're like, wait, you're getting what salary? Really? And then they'll be like, but you guys get healthcare. And it's like, with $100,000 extra, I could buy a whole ton of healthcare, I bet. Speaking of things that you could probably buy.
That'll start a war in the comments.
What you can't buy in America is income, because that is the...
It's like you can't say, oh my God, Americans, well, no, you can't. Obviously, it's true. Your healthcare is awful. And then also get mad when they get more salary. Well, that's the reason, is because they don't get the healthcare benefits and a lot of the stuff that you get. So obviously you can't have.
So this is a more accurate graph, in my opinion, is income, because that is the thing that you buy with. So this is a more accurate graph, in my opinion. Again, I because of its post tax and post social transfers and post education healthcare expenses, most people measure themselves as the pre-tax salary, which makes no sense. Like if there's a mandatory 40% coming out of your salary, like here in the UK, like surely you should measure yourself on after that. But no, we measure them pre that. Whereas if we use just the pre that salary that everyone actually measures themselves on, it's like, yeah, actually, not only is there a big disparity in the US where like Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico's at less than 30,000, Mississippi's at 30 to 50,000. Like, man, there's some states doing not so well. What is this state? It looks like
Arkansas.
Look at the shape of that. That can't be a state, right?
The heart of Bible country.
No, that's Alabama. That's Mississippi. That's Louisiana. What state is there?
Arkansas.
And looks like that. You know what? Let's go on a fact-finding mission. Oh, Arkansas. What a weird-looking state. Has anyone ever looked at Arkansas? Like, for real? Like, I mean, is it called Arkansas because it's got that serrated edge on the right? What the hell is going on
That's the
here?
Mississippi River.
Why is it slightly diagonal there? I've got lots of questions about Arkansas.
Is it called Arkansas because of the serrated edge? Like Arkansas. Okay.
One of those questions, though, is why are you down there at the bottom of the barrel with West Virginia and Mississippi? Anyway, but you can see that, like, oh yeah, in California, in
Massachusetts,
not Connecticut, Massachusetts, And New Jersey, my God, is the average annual salary high. I imagine a lot of the New Jersey is contributed to from people working in New York but living in New Jersey. Also, Hawaii is insanely high up there. What's with all the money in Hawaii, huh?
I thought Alaska
Can anyone
was
explain
higher
that to me?
as well.
Give me a nice 6-paragraph comments in the... And with that said, next up here, we got the one thing where Europe comes out really big ahead. Railroad density. Choo-choo. Wait, apparently not. It looks like, on average, it looks like the United States apparently has more. But when you look at the countries which are in deep red, deep purple, you can see the UK, Germany, the Netherlands. Like in Central Europe, we have more railroads than a lot of America has. So score one Europe, although apparently I read this map wrong the first time. This is why it's important.
Probably just be a similar map of just infrastructure, period.
Agreed. Also, Iceland, did you know this?
Much
this is
easier
crazy.
to...
Iceland is one of the X number of countries in the world that doesn't have railroads. There is 0. There is no state in America that doesn't have a train, but there is countries, several.
I would assume because I would guess most of, like, it's too far away from Europe to have railroad tracks to Iceland, obviously. And so most of your international trade is going to be ocean-based and probably trade within your own country is probably boat as well. And so you don't need the train infrastructure.
In Europe that just don't have any, and so that's probably what it's definitely Iceland that's just
Domestic,
sandbagging
that's
our
what I
figures. Definitely Europe #1 in terms of railroads. You don't have to look at maps and objectively evaluate them. You can go on feelings. So yeah, you can see that a lot of people say that like Europe has so much train track. What Europe actually has, if you look a little bit closer, man, this map zooms in far, huh? But what you actually realize is that Europe has a lot of passenger railroad. Like Germany is a very well-connected nation in terms of trains and stuff. And the United States is a well-connected nation in terms of trains for goods. In terms of people, like, do you want to take a train 72 hours from New York to California?
Yeah, it's definitely best from, like, Boston to D.C. Like, there's probably the best travel infrastructure in this corridor, and a lot of people. It's like a giant metropolitan area just full of people, this area.
You can, and I'm excited to do that at some point in the next year or two, but it's not the default way people do that. I probably got to do that soon because with COVID ending, they'll start like right now you get a whole room to yourself because like social distancing. But once we forget what the word social distancing means, that's it. I gotta make sure I get that done soon. Speaking of things I'm gonna do soon, I'm gonna leave to America, and so a lot of people might wonder like, well, the salaries are high in the United States, but you know, insert bad thing here. Actually, if you look at the actual stats on the number of Americans who migrate. Europeans who migrate to the US versus Americans who migrate to Europe. The only countries where it's like even balanced is Switzerland and it could be in Lithuania. I got them mixed up, and everyone was like, "You don't know geography, Toycat. If you mix up two countries, you're basically done." It's
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. I don't know why that just sticks with me. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
How dare anyone get Lithuania and Latvia confused? They're so wildly different. But again, I would like to remind you. Latvia is over here, and Lithuania is over here. They're the Nova Scotias and Quebecs of the... honestly, Nova Scotia and, like, I don't know, New Brunswicks of the world. So, you know what? I'm sorry, Lithuanians and Latvians, but everyone else, get out of here. I don't care about your opinions. But what I do care about is the fact that, yeah, it seems as though, even despite all of the things that Europeans like to say, that like, oh, we're so good over here, in general, there is a large migration, because the biggest factor that makes people move...
population.
I was thinking about this recently because we looked up the number of like runners from that one region of Jamaica, that one region of Kenya. There is a huge number of them, and even in Jamaica, a huge number of people will move not to other Caribbean nations or to other areas around. They move to the US first because that's the biggest opportunity for someone. And even in Europe, where our standards of living are some of the best in the world, right? Like, you know, the $22,000 a year is huge on a global standard. $29,000 a year is huge on the global level. But even then, having higher salaries, and in some industries it's a lot higher, is enough to make people migrate en masse.
I think the biggest reason is that there is still so much to be created in America and, you know, just the North American continent. And so I think like it's so like everything is so saturated in Europe. Everything is so, it's harder to probably like create your own dream, like buy this giant plot of land or like be free over here. And so as far as like what Europeans say about freedom in America of like, well, you're so free and yet your healthcare is awful, and you're so free and yet you can't travel, you don't have good infrastructure. But I think the freedom aspect of America is just, it's more of a blank slate than Europe, I'd say. Is that fair?
Yes. I'm actually, like, I want to know the story of the reverse versions of all of these, like Americans who moved to Russia or Americans who moved to Georgia. I bet they just bought a flight to the wrong place and they're too embarrassed and they're like, well, I guess we're starting a new life here. Like, I want to hear the stories of those, because, every single country, it is incredibly believable that more people emigrate from there to go to the United States, right?
Also, I think the U.S. is an obvious choice to travel to if like, you want to move outside of the country you're in, because America's whole history is that, America is probably the best place in the world, or most likely place in the world where someone from a different country might have a community or people in America that they can at least get a foothold in. And so I think that that's a lot of the contributing factors of America. Is it's a good it's probably a more welcoming country of cultures than others.
In my opinion.
I don't know.
However, why do they emigrate if not for money? Because money is the easiest explanation. But what if the actual explanation is sunlight? Because the US is much lower down. I want to say it's lower down than the UK. Again, like the comparable.
Yeah, like this is
equivalent.
not it right here. Like I'm pretty certain. So I live right here, and I'm on the same latitude as like northern Spain. Okay. But it's much...
you get a lot more sunlight than you should get. The reason that it's lower down but not so much warmer is something about the continent. Whatever. The whole of Europe should be frozen over, is my point, but we're lucky because we're near an ocean. And one interesting thing is if you look at sunlight, you can see that in Scotland, the Highlands, less than 1,200 hours of sunlight a year. That averages out to like 3 to 4 hours... less, 3-ish hours a day. A lot of England gets maybe 4 to 5 hours a day. And then in the very south, you get 2,500 to 3,000 hours of sunlight a year. Like 10 hours a day, just under 8 hours, something like that. Whereas, which is the very highest point in Europe, in Spain, which is where a lot of Europeans do move. If you're moving within the EU, or within Europe, let's say, I'd say Spain is perhaps the most common decision. However, looking at the US, even the most northerly bits, Maine and Washington right here, are in the 2,000 to 2,500 range. They're in the same place as northern Spain, northern Italy, southern Italy, northern Greece, and that's the worst bits for sunlight. If you want a lot of sunlight, you can go to the US, because look how much they have over there. I was in Vegas, I can confirm. It was just always sunny. It didn't rain for 200 days in a row or something. I'm very confused by how that's possible geologically speaking, but I guess something desert. And this matches my experience. You know what else matches my experience? The highest recorded temperature. The thing that I really value about Europe that I don't realize is that the temperature is very stable, especially the UK. The highest temperature we've had is somewhere between 35 to 39. Don't know if this is an old map. I feel like we had a 40-something day.
It fluctuates a lot where I am. Like, you'll get really cold winters and can get really hot summers.
But the highest temperature that's been recorded in Nevada is 50 to 54. And the highest in California, in Death Valley almost certainly, I think they're the highest temperatures on Earth, 55 degrees Celsius. Or, if you're American, 131 degrees Fahrenheit.
Thank you, brother.
And I gotta stop doing that accent. It's the worst thing. I'm sorry. You deserve better than this, internet, but I'm gonna keep giving it to you anyway. But also, despite having higher higher record temperatures, there's also much lower record temperatures. As you can see, the UK is like at the very higher end of this, as well as the lower end of this, whereas Canada in particular is at the very bottom end of lowest recorded, and also kind of high up on top recorded. As you can see, Russia is the only comparable. Russia is basically in North America in terms of highest and lowest recorded temperature. Look at that. They're at the very bottom of the scale, and then next to the top of the scale too, because yeah, it's a crazy place in terms of differences.
What is the most southern part of Russia? Is it in the Caucasus, or does it get more south, somewhere more
And so
east?
with that said, we have just one more map to go through, because I think there's a lot of things we can do to explain America versus Europe. I think it's great to explain the income. It's great to explain the density and the way people move, and even the freedoms that we have and stuff. you know, it's important to think about how we can decide these things so differently just based on our geography. But the most interesting one is that birth rates are significantly different because there is this heavy, culture of like immigrating and starting a family to some extent, maybe combined with some of the cultures being more likely to do that. You can see how birth rates in the United States are a little bit higher. However, bear in mind that the United States has a really low birth rate in terms of overall countries because of the fact that it is a developed country and the fact that the United States and every state besides like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Nevada or New York, no, Pennsylvania, or like, a lot of states are like in the deep red there, but all of Europe besides France and Ireland and like not even the parts of Europe that aren't Europe anymore, like North Africa and Turkey, like all of these countries are the only ones that are coming anywhere near the top of the tier.
So this is just birth rate, not immigrated.
Whereas the fact that Texas and Alaska are up there, why are people having children in Alaska? You should be, like heating the fire and not dying.
Like, I feel like Alaska is to Americans what America is to Europe. No, actually, no. Never mind. That's a bad
anyway,
example.
but with that said, you can see that one of the biggest problems Europe has is not like trying to prevent people from leaving, because en masse, it seems as though, no, I wouldn't say en masse, it's like as a disproportionate amount of people are leaving to go to countries where there are better incomes. I'd say Australia is another common example, or, there's lots of countries that are happy to take you if money is your key concern. There are lots of places where there's more sunshine and higher temperatures. If for some godforsaken reason 39 degrees isn't enough for you, something's wrong with you. But what you can do is you can go to the places where it's 131 Fahrenheit sometimes, with lots of sunshine and lots of other people who have left there. But I'd say the biggest problem that Europe has to deal with is not any of that. It's realistically, it's dealing with how do you encourage people to have children here. You can replace that with immigration to some extent. I think Germany's done, is like...
become less developed, I guess.
The European example of that.
Destroy all of your infrastructure. I don't know.
And the UK is trying to be in there. There's a lot of countries that are trying this, but even then you need to work out, well, if they get here and we also have high standards of living and that's what makes people not do children, then how do we fix that problem? Fixing this fundamental map right here is the biggest issue that both continents have outside of Texas and Alaska.
I think the main contributor is that it seems like the level of of a job and money you have to reach to where you can bring enough money to even consider getting married, buying a house, and having 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. Like, I feel like you used to be able to do that if you were like a police officer or a teacher, or you worked at, like, it seems like the bar is so much higher nowadays in what you have to do to have like your standard 3 kids, your own house, a wife, and a dog, like so I feel like that's it. It's like what used to be just, it still is a standard job, could get you what you needed to have a good family and procreate and for them. But I think it's just the bar you have to reach in order to reach that level where you can comfortably settle down is higher, I'd say.
Idaho, and it's going to be Utah, isn't it? Yeah, that's definitely Utah. Of course. Something about Mormons. But yeah, besides 4
Mormons.
states in the US and Turkey, which is only arguably a European country, we still have a pretty concerning birth rate problem. I think I want to say the replacement rate is like 1.5, something like that. And the fact that it's gone that far below is a little bit concerning. Maybe it's like 2.5. Yeah, I think it's 2.3. Whatever, we're all below the replacement rate, and we can only replace with people from other places for so long. Or can we? Let me know in the comments a deep explanation of birth rates, their problems, and everything else that you think about it. For now, though, do you want to go to Death Valley? What does Death Valley actually look like? Why do we call it that? Did that many people really die there? Let's go look at the Devil's Cornfield. That sounds like a slang for... Honestly, it doesn't look that hot, right? I mean, it's like hot. The depressing thing is just like there's mountains there and there's mountains there, and you'd start walking down the road and you'd forget, like, wait a minute, which way was I walking? Because the road looks identical and the mountains... I'm sure that wouldn't happen, but I think that's the biggest depressing thing. Imagine before the roads came here, this was just a big desert, and now you can get tiny cars there. Look how tiny. It's like a toy car. Speaking of things that are toy cars, that is how you could misspell my name.
What in the hell is that?
If you wanted to, and if you want to support more bad videos like this, you can go to Patreon. It's linked down below, and you can buy me a kebab. And yeah, don't worry, none of the money will be going to making these videos better. It will still be me talking over a green screen, where for some reason the whole right half of my hand gets cut off here. It's like really, really low end. Low budget videos for a low budget audience, because you know what? You might think it's me that's bad. But really, you know, you watch this video and so it's you that's bad. See, I'm so good at doing this whole like favorite subscribe thing. Make sure you don't subscribe because second channel, don't care. See you later.
That's wonderful.
Bye.
That's wonderful. So yeah, that's got to be awesome just having this you don't give a crap channel. So obviously he's got the bigger one, but it's a cool video. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you can learn something or can teach me something in the comments. We'd love if you liked and subscribed, and hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.